All right. Well, I want to welcome everybody to another episode of the Shadows Podcast. I'm your host, Trip Bodenheimer, and this is a cool moment for me today. So, since I started this podcast, one of my big personal, I'm not just going to say professional, but personal inspirations in my life is on here with me. I've mentioned him a lot through stories. So, more than likely, if you've heard me say on the podcast, oh, yeah, I once heard this, or somebody once told me this is usually who I'm referring to right here. I didn't get to spend a whole lot of time, but it just goes to show if someone has enough personal power, they can make such a big impact on someone, even in one of those small snapshots of time that we have in our lives. So I'm on here today with my former commandant, senior non-commissioned officer in the United States Air Force. I must say Chief Demetrius Booth. I'm not going to say just Demetrius. It's going to be Chief Booth on here. So, sir, welcome to the Shadows Podcast.
Yo, it is my honor and my pleasure to jump in here with you.
What you were on Rise from the Shadows.
I was,
Yeah,
yep,
you
I
were on
was.
Rise from the Shadows. So you were on that one. And then yeah, so like I said, this is something I've been wanting to do for a while. But for our listeners, at the time we're recording, where are you located at? Because you're gonna be somewhere different probably by the time this episode drops.
Oh yeah, currently I'm over at Columbus Air Force Base in Mississippi, inside of the 14 Flying Training Wing.
And you're headed to
Heading over to Barksdale Air Force Base to be the group's senior enlisted leader,
okay.
the mission
And
support group's senior enlisted leader.
so you about to have fun packing up, getting all the like Home Depot boxes in the house and hoping.
Yeah, I actually got permission from my wife to do a personal procurement move. I had to bribe her with a new washer and dryer, but I
Okay.
think I came out in those negotiations.
I always worry about when we do those moves, like especially when we were moving from like Germany to the States, and you're wrapping your own stuff up that you don't want the movers to deal with, and you're like, I hope I see this again. I
Yeah,
hope
yeah,
I hope I pack
yeah.
this right to where they won't have to, I won't have to go out and buy another one again. But um, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and put you through a couple of the rapid fire questions that we do here. I
Okay.
can't wait to see how you answer this one. Book recommendation.
Book recommendation. The one that I always give is the Alchemist. That is like always my go to. And if I had to do like a very close second, the Four Agreements.
Okay.
That one is always money.
I actually got Alchemist because of you, and I read that. Teresa read it, love it. Actually, have let some other people read that one. It's not a long read.
No, it's not.
No, good
And,
journey,
and it's
good
how,
journey.
yeah, yeah. You can definitely see yourself in the
Yeah,
story.
yeah. What is the fear that you have?
Uh, Not getting it all done. I've had a couple of conversations with my wife, and I'll say like, man, like how long do you think we have? And making sure that I get it all in while I have an opportunity. That when it's my time to transition to eternal life, that I go empty, that I don't show up before God with all of these gifts and all of this stuff that I was supposed to give the world. So my fear is not giving the world what I'm supposed to while I'm here.
To piggyback off that one, what's one thing that you always seem to put off?
That
I'm
that's
not
that's
asking Lynette. I'm asking you.
yeah. That is a tough one, man. So I always fancy myself someone who wills their way to it. Currently, I'm back in school again, and hopefully, my teacher never hears this because I'm always like just about a day or two late in turning in my assignments. But that schoolwork part, I'm always behind and getting done, and
I
hopefully my
wouldn't get
kids.
that from you.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I will take an extra day or two to turn some dang on schoolwork in.
Okay. I wouldn't have got that. That's actually shocking to me.
Yeah, man.
You
Don't
can,
tell my kids because I
I
stay
won't.
on
I
them
won't.
about being on time, on target.
Just don't share
Yeah,
this link with them.
yeah. Just don't share the link with my kids.
You can define leadership in one word. How would you define it?
Influence,
Oh, that was quick too.
influence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And this has become like a staple of the podcast. This is one that I get more people talking about this one than I do sometimes in interviews. Dinner for three historical figures who are no longer with us. Who do you break bread with?
Ooh, okay. One of them, not a historical figure, but I gotta bring him. My grandfather. I would absolutely have to have him at the table. I got so many questions. He has this like mythical story behind him, and as he was getting older and transitioning to eternal life, that is when I was coming into manhood. So I never
Mm-hmm.
got to sit and talk with him. So my grandfather, I would absolutely bring Jesus to the conversation.
Been
Tons of
there
questions
before.
as well, and then I would talk with Martin Luther King Jr. Those would be my three dudes that if I could have a dinner with three: grandfather, Jesus, and Martin Luther King Jr.
Who would probably carry that conversation?
I would hope that it would be.
Yeah.
I hope it
I
would
feel
be
like
Jesus.
Jesus would sit back though and let them do more of the talking.
Like I would be like, "Hey, Grandpa, I'm gonna come back to you. Give me a moment." But every time I got an answer from either Martin Luther King Jr. or my grandfather, I would look over at Jesus, like, "Hey, what can you
What's your
weigh in
take
on that?
on that?
Yeah, what's your take?
Yeah.
How would you approach that? WWJD, what would Jesus do?"
Yeah.
So I would turn it back over to him every time.
All right. Well, you survive rapid fire questions. So now the easy part. Now we start talking about you. So
Okay.
what was childhood like for young Demetrius?
Hmm. Childhood was tough. I had a conversation with my mom before she passed away last year. One of the things initially I had a problem with is that I really didn't get to be a kid. Grew up on the south side of Chicago. I am the oldest of five, and so there was a lot of times that my mom operated in the capacity of a single parent. My
Mhm.
stepfather, there would be moments where he would come and go, and he was growing and maturing, and so everything didn't always go according to like that picture perfect plan that you imagine for a family, which required a lot to be levied upon me to help my mom and help raise my sisters and my brothers in the process. And so for me, the hardest part was like not being able to like be a kid, to like make
Mhm.
stupid decisions, do wild things, learn and grow, because I always had to be the responsible person. That is how it was growing up in the Booth home.
Do you feel like any of that carried over to you being a parent?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. My wife is also a first child, and so we have those conversations all the time. There are plenty of moments that if you talk to our oldest daughter Nia, that she would tell you that we levied some of those same responsibilities on her that we had as the oldest kids.
Yeah.
That I would constantly have conversations with her about being responsible, taking care of people, not taking advantage of her little brother and sisters, so that they would always look up to her, all based on like what I had experienced.
Almost subconsciously.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah. What were some of your aspirations as a kid?
Man, I wanted to be a doctor.
Yeah.
Like if you'd as crazy as that sounds, right? If you'd have went to like 9-year-old, 11-year-old D and been like, "Hey man, what do you want to be when you grow up?" Hands down, I would have said, "Oh, I'm gonna be a doctor. I'm gonna work at a hospital."
What kind of
That
doctor?
that
Or
was
just
that
at
was
that age it was just doctor, I think.
oh yeah, I just wanted to be a doctor. Yeah, yeah.
When did you start thinking, all right, Air Force is something I want to do?
Man. So I had not considered going into the military. Even when I was in high school, I was vehemently against me joining the military.
Mm-hmm.
My stepfather was in the Army beforehand. My mom got married, and then he transitioned into the Army Reserves. And I was like, nope, not doing it. My uncle was a Marine, and then he went into the Army Reserves. And my uncle, may you rest in peace, would always sit and be like, "Hey man, I think you should go into the military." And I was like, "Absolutely not." And it wasn't until I decided that I was going to marry my high school sweetheart And I was like, hey, I got to be able to provide for this girl. College ain't for me right now.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go to the military. I'm gonna go to the army. And my uncle was like, "Don't be crazy. Go to the Air Force." My stepdad was like, "The Air Force will treat you better. They care about your education. They'll care about you. It'll provide a better way of life for your family." And so off towards the Air Force I went.
Yeah. How did your family react to that when you told them you were joining the Air Force?
So my mom was happy, especially because it was the Air Force, and I would get the guaranteed job. That was
Yeah.
like the number one thing in the late '90s. The Air Force would give you a guaranteed job.
Yeah.
Recruiters were running around telling kids, "Oh, it's a 9 to 5, man. The Air Force is like working for a regular company. You'll get
Benefits.
pay. You'll love this, man. Monday through Friday. You got health care benefits." So my mom was exceptionally happy until I came back from the recruiter's office and she found out that I signed up to be security forces. That is when things shifted a little bit. She came back around. I was probably one of the more prouder moments of her life that she raised me, and then I was out in the world doing well and serving others.
That's gonna be my next question. Was it wasn't just you joined, but then you joined as security forces or a civilian equivalent, basically being a cop.
Yeah, yeah.
So how'd you get her sold on that?
And listen, when I left the house, because she let me go by myself, my mom was like very protective of her kids. I was like, hey, I got it. I'm gonna drive over there. I'm gonna get this guaranteed job. My ASVAB scores were high enough. She was like, all right. And the deal was that I was supposed to be an electrician. That was the deal. I was always good with my hands. I love knowing how things work. I'm gonna be an electrician. He was like, cool. I walk into the recruiter's office. He's like, hey, I'm gonna get some paperwork together. I'm gonna show you a video while I do it, so you're not just sitting around. Pops the video in VHS cassette tape. It comes up on the screen, up on the
Give you an
wall.
idea what era this was. Yep.
Bro, 1999 Air Force recruiting commercial for security forces. So I see dudes on like ATVs. I see them jumping out of planes. I see them in patrol cars. I see them with guns. I see them shooting, moving, communicating. I see dogs running off leash after people. And he
You're
walks
like,
back in. Yes, starry eyed. And I said, I want to do that. And he's like, man, I thought you wanted to be an electrician. And I was like, how do I do that? He's like, well, your scores are already good enough. If that's what you want, man, I can get you up out of here soon with that job. Sign me up for that. I got back to the house. I walk in. I'm trying to avoid my mom. She's like, hey, did you get your job? And I said, yes, ma'am, I got my job. And I like beeline for my bedroom. I'm probably back there for like 2 minutes. And she calls me back into the living room. And I'm like, yes, ma'am. She's like, you got your job. And I was like, yes, ma'am, I got my job. And I'm like trying to get away from her again. And she's like, get back in here. I walk back in. What job do you have? Security forces. She's like, what's security forces? And I explain it to her. And she's like, get your in the car. Drives me back down to the recruiter's office. We walk in and she's yelling at him. And she's like moving stuff on his desk. And she's like pushing stuff. And she's like, change it. He's going to be an electrician. And he's like, I can't. Like he's 18. Like it was his decision. And he's looking at me like, help. And I'm looking at him like, I don't want nothing to do with this. And so eventually he convinces her that it's my decision to make. We leave in the car. She's giving me an earful, and I convinced her to let me make a choice on my own. That I believe that this is the right thing for me. That I'm just going to learn some skills. I'm only going to do this for 6 years anyway, and then I'll be able to do whatever else I want. And funny story is, I would say probably 14 years later, I'm stationed down at Lackland. I'm getting ready to PCS to off it up in Nebraska. And so I'm like, I'm gonna go over to the gym on Randolph because I lived closer to Randolph. I'm in there working out, and I hear Booth. So I'm like looking around, like nobody here should know me. I'm like, I'm on Randolph. This isn't my base. And I'm looking around, and then boom, Sergeant Hester. And I'm like, yo, Sergeant Hester, who was my recruiter. And I'm like, man, how are you? And he's like, dude, you're still in. I'm like, I'm still in. At the time, I was a master sergeant. I'm like, I'm a master sergeant. Things are going well. He was retired. And as we're just talking and catching up, there's this moment where he pauses. And I can tell he's reflecting and he smiles. And then he chuckles and he looks back up at me he's like, how's your mom? And I was like, you remember her? He's like, dude, I have never had anybody come in and push my computer screen over, knock all the papers off my desk,
Ruin my
and tell me to
VHS.
change. Yeah, change the job, lit the VHS on fire, so he couldn't hire any other guys to be security forces. And so that is how I ended up being a defender, because Sergeant Hester put this video on in his office.
Can you imagine when he went back there and started talking to the other recruiters and stuff? He's like, "Can you believe this guy had an electrician lined up and he chose to go?" So
To
he's
go
like, "Man,
secure.
that VHS does its job."
Like that thing is, I don't know who recorded that video, but that thing is money.
I would love to see that video now, and it's got to be
Dude,
like out there somewhere.
it's gotta be. It's gotta be. It was the most ate up Air Force video that you could probably muster.
what What were some of the early struggles you had?
Man, I being a kid from the south side of Chicago, some of the early struggles I had is that when I joined the Air Force, I joined with a chip on my shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
Based on the environment that I was in, you could not show any signs of weakness or vulnerability, or you would just be eaten alive. And so I came into the Air Force with that same chip on my shoulder. In my community, it was like primarily all Black people, with
Mm-hmm.
the exception of police officers and teachers. So positions of people of authority, and they didn't even live in our neighborhoods. They traveled in and worked as teachers and police officers. And so my only interaction with people who did not look like me was them being in positions of authority. And so coming into the Air Force, you mix a Black kid from the south side of Chicago with a chip on his shoulder. And at that time, I want to say the Air Force was like almost 78% white. And so now my first duty station, Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana. And so you take this kid and you drop him there. One of my greatest challenges when I first joined the Air Force was me. My problem was that I was the problem. I had a chip on my shoulder. I didn't want to listen to them. I thought I knew it all, like every 19-year-old, 18-year-old in the world. And so there were moments where they really couldn't tell me anything.
Did you ever encounter any sort of racial discrimination early in your career?
Oh, bro, absolutely. Uh, Funny thing is, I can't remember the commander's name now. He was a lieutenant colonel. I showed up to Malmstrom Air Force Base early 2000. And there was a group of us who had just gotten there, some from security forces, which was most of the bulk because it's a new base. And then there were these other kids. And so he pulls, we get told that we have an appointment with the commander, and they name us out, and we don't realize what's happening until we're in the commander's office. Now, once we get in there, we realize that it's like nothing but the Black kids in the commander's office. And we're all like, yo, what's happening here? Like, why did they only pick us? He sits at his desk and he says to us, like, hey, it pains me to say this to you. You are airmen in the Air Force. You are defending your country. And there are places that I'm getting ready to tell you that you cannot go to because you are not welcome there here in Montana. And then he pulls up his map and he starts pointing to these areas. And he's like, hey, this town over here, stay away from it. Don't go. Don't take your family. These towns over here, which would be referred to as sundown towns. He's like, hey, if you can avoid them, avoid them. But if you have to go through these places, make sure it's during the day. Make sure your vehicle is completely full up. And this is like in 2000.
Yeah.
The racial epithet of the N word had been used against my wife at grocery stores. One story in particular, I was working out in the missile field. And during that time, there were like these little mom and pop stores
Mm-hmm.
that sometimes would be out there in those spaces. I'm with my SART leader, my security response team leader, senior airman. I'm an airman first class. And he's like, hey, we're gonna swing by the store. You got some cash on you? And I was like, yeah, I got a couple bucks on me. Like, yeah, let's go get some snacks. We go in, he goes, he gets his stuff. I'm in the vehicle watching weapons. And then when he's done, he comes out and I go in. As I'm grabbing my things, the guy behind the register is talking to an older gentleman. The older gentleman looks at me, looks back at the clerk, looks back at me, and says, "I can't wait till we can get rid of these missiles so we can get rid of these N-words." While I'm standing there
Wow.
in uniform, standing there, that's how he felt about me. So I put my things back. The clerk was very apologetic. I put all my things back. I went out to the car. The senior airman who was with me was like, "Hey man, like I thought you said you had cash. I got you covered." I was like, "No, I got money. I'm just not gonna get anything here." He
Yeah.
can tell I was visibly upset, and he's like, "Hey, what's wrong?" And I was like, "Man, you ain't gonna believe what just happened to me in there." He's like, "Well, what happened?" So I tell him the story. He was obviously irate. He's like, "Hey, I'm gonna go back in there and bludgeon this guy to death." And I'm like, "Hey man, like that's not gonna solve anything.
Yeah.
I appreciate your outrage and you're wanting to protect me, but you're not gonna change that guy." And so there have been many moments that I have experienced it. Sometimes in like the worst of ways. Here in the States, I've been deployed. One place in particular, when I was at Camp Buka in Iraq, there were spaces that were only for the military to go into. And so I go into the washroom to shower, and right there on the stall, it's this riddle. What's the difference between a San N word and an American N word? And then below it, it had "one wears a towel on his head." And in that moment, being deployed, willing to give my life in defense of everybody else there with me. And this is before the Airman Creed existed, but that is the vibe that we had, that we were already living it before it was put to words. And to walk into a bathroom, into a shower area where only U.S. service members were using, knowing that one of my teammates wrote that riddle on the wall, knowing that African American airmen would see it and feel less than. Those are probably the two moments that were the worst in my experiences being in the military.
I appreciate you sharing those. I get it. We're in 2023 and we're still not where as a society we want to be. But when do you
Absolutely.
think there was a paradigm shift to where we started to really, really tackle this issue versus, in 2000, which is crazy to believe, it was get over it, move on.
Yeah. Granted, we still have a lot of work to do, but to not recognize the strides that we have made would be a foul on me.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that the military as a whole has been very forward leaning and progressive
Yeah.
in our ability to treat everyone fair and equitably across the board, and to create environments of inclusion. That we don't always get it right. There are times, if you go back to the disparity report that was published by the RAND Corporation, that it still exists where these personal and unconscious biases still play a part in how we deliver punishment, how we promote people, award winners, all of that stuff. But writ large, I think the military, the Department of Defense does a better job than our country as a whole. And if we look back over history, we would see that as the military has made progress, that the country typically follows a little
Yes.
bit slower. And so, even with all of those things, I would say from the moment that things it was forced integration, that was the start of moving the ball in the right direction. But even if we go back to those points of George Floyd that summer and his death, the country is on fire. I was a part of a command where the wing commander chose not to say anything about it. People were feeling a certain way. Airmen were angry on all different sides for very different reasons. And the leadership team, because the wing commander chose not to say anything because he didn't know what to say or how to approach it, and he didn't want to get fired or cause more problems, said nothing. And it made it worse, even though we advised him that we needed to do something. he chose for the wing to not.
I got a question about that because we were just having this conversation not too long ago. Crucial conversations is something that's like a really hot topic right now. And one of the topics is me as a white male. I don't know what it's like to drive down the road as an African American, and much less be in a room where someone's like, "Don't go to this town, don't go to
Yeah.
this," and it's all about kind of bridging that gap and understanding things from both sides. What are some pointers and tips you would have for people out there who may not necessarily know what it's like to walk a day in your shoes as an African American male, but they're too afraid, like you said, or they don't necessarily know the words to say? What are some pointers you would have for them?
I would offer that it is going to cost. That
Mm-hmm.
there's no doubt about it. And in order for us to affect change, there will be a cost incurred. And because sacrifice is meaningless if there is no consequence to it. And so there are moments where white males in the Air Force will be upset and angry because they feel like everything is being pointed back at them, that they are the problem, that they have the unconscious biases, that people who look like me, who are African American males in the Air Force, that we've been given a raw deal. Maybe we have, maybe we haven't. But in the process, if you ever got taken the time to get to know your teammates on all colors of human beings, to get to know your teammates, this notion of being able to walk a mile in someone else's shoes, that is only the beginning of it. That is the process that I am willing to sacrifice who I am and what I have been taught to learn something different. And so what I typically would ask is that is just the starting point. Your willingness to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. But in order to do so, you have to take your shoes off to put theirs on. And when you put their shoes on, carry them on that journey because there will be things that you will see that you will not understand because you have never lived in the color of this skin in America. And
Mm-hmm.
so there may be things that you'll see that if you walked a mile in my shoes, that you wouldn't understand the context for if you didn't carry me. And just that weight of carrying me and having me point things out over this mile journey gives you a taste of the weight that I have carried just by being an African American male in America, no matter what time period you put me in. And don't get me wrong, things are far better. The things that my grandfather dealt with and faced in his time in the Navy during World War II, what I have experienced is far less than what he did. And so I appreciate all of those men and women who came before me, who broke barriers, who burst through those clouds so that it could shine down on me. And I strive to continue to do the same for others.
You mentioned the report that came out a couple of years back, and I had Chief Wright, uh, retired Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force,
Okay.
right on the podcast a while back, and I asked him about that report and his opinions on it, and it was kind of an interesting take as to what he said. He said that he feels that it was more of a sympathy empathy thing where it was if me as a white male, he said, you may not have gotten in trouble much in your life, but you come in and now you're being talked to by a commander, you're legit like fearful. You're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. And they can see the fear in your face because you've never really been confronted. You may have been confronted by your parents or something at one point, but for the most part, you've lived life and have not had people in your face all the time. He said where you may have an African American male who has constantly had to talk to police just by walking down the road, and you've got a cop coming up to you like, what are you doing here? You've constantly got teachers. The first time that you try to act out, they're like, he's trouble. Constantly having to talk to principals in the military, constantly having to talk to supervisors.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're subconsciously targeted at a lot of these places. And he says to where by the time they go talk to someone for being in trouble, it's like the demeanor is different because it's like,
Yeah.
here we go again. And the look on
Again.
your face, your nonverbals are to
Yep.
where you look at the white male and you're like, wow, he gets it. He's scared. And I think he learned his
Yeah.
lesson. And he said, I saw that. I saw people leave, and he'd be like, I think Trip just learned his lesson. And then Demetrius leaves, and it's like, you see that? He's defiant. We need
Mhm.
to make an example out of him. Do you think that had anything to do with it?
Absolutely, man. As I after that report came out, I had some commanders who trusted me and chose to be vulnerable with me, who came to talk and asked me my story.
Yeah.
And in doing so, I was able to share with them that I was that kid.
Yeah.
The difference was is that I learned early on how the game was played,
Yeah.
and early
What he
on,
said. Yeah. You got to learn how to play the game.
I learned how to play the game, and I adapted. And I had a little bit more to lose because I got a wife. And at this juncture, as a senior airman, I got two children by my wife. And like, man, if it's not this, this is a steady paycheck. If it's not this, then man, like, what do I do if I have to leave this Air Force thing? Some of those other kids who came in the same time as me didn't fare as well because they refused to play the game.
Yeah.
They didn't have as much to lose. And so for me, sometimes I would just take it, or I would adapt to the environment so that I didn't have to deal with it. Or if I went into a room and I had a couple of moments where that was me, where they were like, I don't think you get it. And I haven't said a word because you left me standing at attention. Like, like, how do you know I don't get it? I've gotten kicked out of offices. I've been told that I didn't deserve to lead airmen, that I was the worst kind of person without them even knowing me. The way I spoke, I've been told that I'm ghetto and that my ghetto language didn't work in the Air Force. And so in the process, I was no different from them. I just recognized that at that moment, I was willing to sacrifice uh, a part of who I was so I could take care of my family. And so I agree with Chief Master Sergeant Air Force retired right on that. And this is such a complex issue that we could probably talk all day
Yeah.
and lay out multiple levels and layers to this.
Yeah. No, no, this is good stuff. I want to get to another hot topic here in just a second, but you did join. You mentioned you were watching VHSs in a recruiter's office. You
Yeah.
joined. You are security forces. You're a defender. 2001, September 11th happens. I always like to ask people, like, because this is like our generation's Kennedy assassination. Where were you at, and what do you remember about September 11th, 2001?
Man, I was up at Malmstrom Air Force Base. I was already in. I joined in October of 99. And so as we're approaching 2001, around that same time frame, I'm getting ready to hit 2 years in the Air Force. And so I'm out in the missile field. I'm a flight security controller, which is the equivalent of a desk sergeant, but out controlling nuclear silos, security for them. I'm watching the news. I worked at midship.
Mm-hmm.
We're watching the news is on. Senior Airman Kelton was in charge of the missile alert facility where we were. He's coming on, and we're doing changeover, and we're preparing to go home. We're watching the news, and we see the relay for the first tower being hit. As we're watching it, we're like, man, like this is crazy. Like, what air traffic controller fell asleep at the controls? Like, man, like people are dying. Like, man, like this is absurd. Like, what is happening? And in real time, as the news is showing the first tower on fire, the mayhem that's ensuing, we are watching the news and we see the second plane bank and hit the tower. He and I looked at each other, and at the alert facility, there's a red foam on the wall that's connected to the capsule crew. That's probably like at least minimum 100 feet below ground, and it starts ringing. Uh, Kelton looks at me and he says, "This is a terrorist attack." And I was like, "What?" I'm an A1C. I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Young, airman first class. I walk over to the phone, I pick up, and I say, hey, airman first class Booth, how can I help you, sir? And he says, get everybody up. We need security patrols on the road. We believe that this is a terrorist attack. Our country may have just entered into a war, and we don't know with whom. I hung up that phone. I looked over at Kelton and I repeated it. He's like, let's go. And I'm running through the halls and I'm waking everyone up. I remember trying to call my wife so that she knew I was still okay. All of the phone lines were just busy. The young kids nowadays, they wouldn't understand that. Back then, you picked up the phone, tried to dial a number, boop, 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 can't get through.
That was a bad feeling.
Horrible feeling.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, needless to say, we did not go home that day. We were full up security ops. I couldn't go home for 4 days. It was around that time that my wife found out that I was okay because I showed back up at home. She had been worrying. She had been up to the squadron.
Probably no
All
cell phone.
no cell phones. No cell phones. And she went up to the squadron. They told her that I was fine. But for her, it's like, no, I need to see my husband so I know
Mhm.
he's fine. I'm from Chicago, so I have family who worked down at the time. It was the Sears Tower, and so the Twin Towers get hit. I'm worried now that my aunts who work at Sears Tower may have also been a target. And so yeah, I was Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana, getting ready to come home from the missile field on that day.
I always say on here whenever we talk about it, I'm like, people, especially like younger, God, I sound so old, especially like younger generation, they
Yeah.
don't like Becton. I'll go with my daughter. It doesn't sound as bad. They will never understand the heightened
Yeah.
patriotism we had right
No.
after that for probably about 6 months.
It was crazy.
It was crazy how much there was American flags all over the place and everybody was looking out for each other. And it was just, yeah, I almost joined then. Um,
Yeah.
I really did. I wanted to go to the recruiter's office right then and there. Susan Bodenheimer was like, no, this is the wrong time to go to the recruiter's office. Or I would have been security forces with you probably. But yeah, it was just crazy. And then, yeah, your journey kind of takes you down the road. You go professional military education.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever asked you like how you got into PME.
Yeah. So I was security forces through and through. I had a stint where I was down at the TACP schoolhouse, got medically removed from the program, and so I hit this place of like despair because like this is what I knew. Thinking back to that VHS, like that's what I'm supposed to be doing, jumping out of planes.
No, I'm the
Cruising
broken down
along
guy.
an airstrike. Man, I was like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I was slightly disgruntled. I made tech, and I had a chief who had just come back from being a first sergeant, Chief Kanota. She's like, man, like, what is it with you? Like, everybody around here says that you're squared away. It seems like you got a little bit of an attitude. Like, what's going on? So I explained to her what happened. And she's like, you should go and teach at the security forces schoolhouse. I was like, no, I don't want to do that. She was like, why? I was like, I'm not a teacher. It's not what I do. And she's like, well, I think you should. And she just bugged me and bugged me.
Hmm.
This is before the current developmental special duty program. And so all I really had to do is put my enlisted performance reports together and send them off to some guy working at the Air Force Personnel Center. And essentially, I would get hired. And so she bugged me enough. And so one day, finally, I was like, all right, whatever it takes to get you to leave me alone. So I sent everything off. A week later, I had an assignment to Lackland. And so we shipped out for Lackland. I got there, I went through my instructor training. And the first lesson in front of a classroom of like 115 security forces airmen, wanting to hear these stories, me like teaching how to do the job, the light bulbs that were coming on, the motivation, the inspiration that existed in those rooms with those kids. It was like the clouds parted, the sun shined down, and it was like, this is what you are supposed to be
Yeah.
doing. And that set me on my path, man. And so when I made senior in my career field, we kind of pigeonhole you a little bit We don't allow you to go out and do a whole bunch of stuff. I made senior, and that was like my opportunity because I didn't have to go through the career field manager, or so I thought, to apply at senior NCOA. And so I did all of the paperwork, sent it all in, did my interview, and they hired me. So I was like, oh, money. A week later, they called me back and they're like, hey, you can't come. And I was like, well, why? Your career field manager will not release you.
Every
And I was
time.
like, what? He's like, yeah, man, I'm so sorry. And I was like, hey, I guess it's just not meant to be. And the chief on the phone with me was the thing he said lit a fire. He said, don't give up. And I was like, what? He was like, don't give up. We really want you here. We think that you would fit in with us very well. Don't give up. And I was like, okay, don't give up. He's like, don't give up. I got off the phone with him. I was working as an exec up at the wing at the time for the command chief.
Yeah.
And I walked into his office and I was like, hey, I know you're getting ready to retire. Do you have one last golden coin that you can spend on me? And he was like, what do you need, D? And I was like, will you call my career field manager and convince her to release me? He was like, why would that be a problem? I'm like, so she knows me. She's going to tell you that I'm security forces through and through and that I need to stay here and that if I try to do that, I won't get promoted. All of these things, none of that matters. That guy wants me down there. He's like, are you sure they didn't just say that to him? I'm like, nope. He told me not to give up. He told me to fight to get down there. He's like, all right, I'll call her. He calls her through some willing and some dealing, some back and forth, chief talk. She releases me. And the rest is a part of the journey of my life, man. I got assigned down there at Senior NCOA, taught there for about a year before applying and getting hired to be the commandant for the instructors course.
What was one of the biggest differences going from security forces to now I'm teaching at the Senior Non-Commissioned Officer Academy?
So being a defender definitely helped me with military bearing, how the military rabbit ears is supposed to be and operate in the mentality. But the major difference that I noticed branching away from security forces is I got to see the Air Force from an enterprise level. That I was teaching leadership, I was teaching strategic thinking, and how it connected with not just security forces, but every career field, every Air Force specialty. There were Marines who were coming through our course, the Navy, the Coast Guard. We were our allied partners. They were sending their senior NCOs. And so it changed the perch that I was on, and it gave me a different view of the Air Force and how one of my gifts could contribute to our ability to be lethal and to care about people and to inspire them.
Speaking of inspiring, you're kind of synonymous with a lighthouse.
Yeah.
So for those who don't know you, explain that to them.
Yeah, I was going through a coaching certification, and as I was doing it, it was on me teetering on getting out of the Air Force. I was slightly jaded, and in that process of being slightly jaded, I was like, "Hey, I'm pulling LeBron James here. I'm gonna take my talents, and I'm going to South Beach. I'm gonna take my talents somewhere else. The Air Force doesn't love me enough. It doesn't treat me well." And so inside of one of my coaching sessions, I was a coachee this time, and someone was coaching me, and they were asking me what I wanted to be known for. And as we were fleshing it out, the topic came up of me leaving the Air Force. And so we did this visualization technique. And he was like, hey, what do you see? And as I was going through it, I was like, man, waves crashing, people on the boat, and they need to make it to land. And he was like, what's going to help them? I was like, a lighthouse. And he's like, who's the lighthouse? Me. I'm the lighthouse. And then we began to talk about what the lighthouse represented. The people on the boat, could I see them? What did they look like? And by the time we were done, the things that a lighthouse represents, he asked me, if I could do that for the United States Air Force.
Mm.
And my answer was yes. Begrudgingly, in that moment, I had to admit, yes, I can be a lighthouse in the United States Air Force. And then he asked me, well, then why would I leave all of those people out there to figure it out alone? And from that moment forward, man, that has been my reminder to be a beacon of hope, a beacon of love, this safe space, this light that will guide you, that shines in darkness, guiding you to shore.
Even with
So,
all those waves crashing around it,
yeah,
the current's pulling you, it's too strong.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that
E-
beacon of hope.
Oh yeah. Even still today, I don't even know if you know this, but even like still at the course, we still every class give out a lighthouse
Oh
to
no, I didn't know that.
yeah, we have these lighthouses that Chief Jackson Foster gets, and she gives them same exact way you described it to each of our senior advisors that help
Oh,
out
that's
with
cool.
the and
That's cool.
I want one before I leave.
Oh, that's cool. Oh, that's cool. So we got lighthouses all over, popping up all over the Air
Popping up
Force.
all over the place
Yeah,
because
yeah,
of what you did and what you've said, and it just really
yeah.
resonated with her. So yeah, that's there's little lighthouses all over people's desks, all
That's
around the Air
that's cool.
Force.
That's cool.
Like I said, and I better have one when I'm PCS out, or I
It's
will.
cool.
I'm
Yeah,
definitely going to ask.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but yeah, so you mentioned that, and also something that I've mentioned this a lot on the podcast, and I thought it was really cool, and it actually helped me a lot in my personal life because I've been an open book about mental health. Been an
Mm,
open book about it since I started this podcast. It was one of the things that kind of drove me to get this going. But I remember we were teaching virtual. Tony
mm.
Richardson, who was also a guest on
Yeah,
here.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
he's you probably know where I'm going with this.
I do, I
So,
do.
so we're doing a virtual session. Students are in the auditorium. He ends up briefing everybody, or no, I think he was about to brief them, and he had made a LinkedIn post where it was like doctors have doctors,
Mm-hmm.
lawyers have lawyers, so on and so forth. And you went on there and you were like, hey, you were thanking him. You're like, hey, your post really motivated me. And at the time, you're still a defender, like a lot of stigmas. African American male, defender, chief master sergeant, like all this stuff. And you're like all these like stigmas that
Mm-hmm.
you don't seek help. You're tough. You fight through it. You put dirt on it. And we're in the auditorium, and a lot of students got their cameras off and everything. And you're like, hey, I just want to thank you. I saw your post on LinkedIn, and also, it really motivated me. And I went to mental health,
Yeah.
and I think I was texting you, and I'm like, you're talking in front of the students, and you were like, I know, and I'm like, oh, okay. So then
Yeah.
the students get on there, and you introduced them, and you told that story about how like it motivated you. And I remember talking to you afterwards, and you were like, yeah, the reason I did that is because I wanted them to know that them coming into this career field, that me, with all the things I just listed off,
Yeah.
I go to mental health,
Yeah.
and it is not, we need to normalize it. And I think you even said it like they were thanking you being the mental health technicians, because it was like, hey, I'm glad to see you in here because it shows all these other people, especially the fact that they're like already tucked away in the back of any clinic you go to, or
Yes,
sometimes they're not
absolutely.
even attached to it, versus
Absolutely.
like optometry and chiropractor right there at the front
Yep.
door.
Yep.
Uh, but yeah, talk to us about the importance of mental health.
And so I am currently in grief counseling now. Last year, almost a year now, last year, last May, my mom passed away.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it was exceptionally tough on me. That moment, doctors need doctors, lawyers need lawyers, coaches need coaches. Uh, it shook something in me, and it broke a part of me in a good way. These walls that existed, so that I recognized that it was important for me to be wrong. I know the Air Force has the mental pillar. We talk about our pillars, that it's important, and a lot of the times we don't put a lot of action behind it.
We do it the other
inside.
three.
Yes, yes. Like you got to be physically fit to do your
Get
job.
out, be social.
Yeah, you got to get out and you got to be social and meet people. But that spiritual pillar, like man, like you got to be spiritual, whatever that means for you. But that mental health pillar has so much stigma attached to it. And so as I began to go through that process, I recognized that I was different and I was not my normal self. And the darkness was starting to encroach on me. And so I went in and I was like, hey, I need help. I can't do this alone. We are all ill prepared to deal with things like this. We don't know how it'll affect us. We don't know how the grief will set in, what we'll do with it. And so I began to do grief counseling.
Mm.
In addition to that, not only again did it manifest itself in a positive way, because if you walk into my office, the book that the grief counselor gave me is sitting right there because my spiritual resiliency book right there. That's how I start my morning to make sure I read a page, so people coming in the office can see it, and it has helped in the conversations with the defenders that I've been entrusted to take care of and lead as they go through traumatic events, as they go through grief. I've been able to say to them, hey man, I need you to go see the mental health folks. And it is not just tongue in cheek, because their chief has lived the example. Everybody in the unit knows that I'm in grief counseling. They know what has happened to me. I've shared with them the post-traumatic stress that I have endured in the Air Force due to the deployments, and that I have been getting counseling and still get counseling for PTSD. And so all of it together, man, you got to go get help. You cannot do it alone.
What about it's going to ruin my career?
That is the number one thing that people respond to me with when I say, "Hey, you gotta," because we have one guy here at Columbus that is typically the one that everybody will flock to, and I'll tell them, "Hey, you gotta go see the captain," uh, and typically the number one thing, especially in security forces, they'll take my guns away, it'll ruin my career, it'll be a blemish on my record.
Mm-hmm.
And we have been able to work with them through that. The number one thing I've always asked coming into this unit right from the beginning is that I recognize that trust is earned in drops, and it's spent or spilt in buckets. I've asked for a drop of trust to give me a loan me a drop of trust. I'll return it with interest, and I'll earn the rest. And so in the process, I have been able to talk to them and influence them to go and get seen. And as some of the negativity flows back, to head it off with my commander, to do the work that's required to make sure, unless it is absolutely necessary for their safety and the safety of others, that we ensure that they are still able to do their job. Because most times, that's the only thing in their life that they still have some control over, that they can still show up, they can do their job well, and nobody can take that part away, and the rest of their world is falling apart. And to take that piece that they have some semblance of control over, I think is counterproductive. And so this notion that will ruin your life and that it'll ruin your career, I believe it's false. That going and getting the help that you need is the only way to save your life. You can always get another job. You can always do other duties,
Mm-hmm.
but once you are taken from this world, we can't ever get another you. And so to save your life is more important than keeping up a persona of a job that you have.
Yeah, I think the normalizing of mental health is, I don't know if it was COVID or what that started to help with it a lot, especially being, locked up like everybody was. But I know for me, early in my career, I was like, I don't need that. I don't have issues. And then childhood trauma is a thing.
Yes.
Childhood trauma is a real thing. You may think you're good as an adult, but that
Yeah.
childhood trauma does not go away. It may subside a little bit, but it's there. And the older I got, I was like, man, my childhood trauma is really, especially we start going over things like emotional intelligence
Absolutely.
and mindfulness and all this other stuff. And it's like, wow, I need to go talk to someone. If somebody wants to explain, like we're quick to ride down the road and point at other vehicles and go like, dang, that
Yeah.
car's messed up. Look at that car. It is barely running. Oh my gosh, they got a flat. Look at them. But we're so afraid to pop our own hood. And when I went to mental health, largely in part because of what you had been saying to the students, I remember going in there and it's not, I don't think what people think it is. And I usually ask, like, what do y'all think mental health is? And they think you're gonna go in there and strap all these wires to you and all this other kind of stuff. It was legit just somebody talking to me.
Yeah.
And someone who has way better questioning techniques than I ever have. And they were legit like, why do you think this? Why do you think that? What about this? Like really good open-ended questions that they were asking me that I'm like, it's a different way to look. And they don't play like will not take your side on anything. They will get you to just to think differently. And I left
Absolutely.
there after a couple of sessions and I'm like, I honestly don't think I need to go anymore because I feel like I've kind of got answers to what I was looking for. But I'll still stand in front of a class right now and be like, hey, 60 of y'all in here, 50 of y'all, 40 of y'all, whatever. I actually said it to the squadron commander training the other day. I was like, I can sit here and say that I was DSD'd twice and senior NCO in the Air Force. And I almost wear it with like a badge of pride now that I've gone to mental health and done it
Yeah.
because just like you're saying now, I'm going into a job at my next base as a senior NCO, possibly running a work center. And it's going to be somebody needs to talk. And I at least have that experience and be able to do so. And it can beat off any stigma that other people are going to say, oh, you can't do that. I'll lose my security clearance. I'll lose this, that, and the other. So I think we're making strides as well, somewhat normalizing that. But I do want to say, you mentioned your mom, and
Mhm.
sorry to hear about everything that happened with her and her passing. I know I was talking to you
Yeah.
around that time. Looking back at your mom, like what is it that you do today that if you were to really like slow down everything, you're like, dang, that's her speaking right there. That's her doing that.
How I care for other people. My mom would always give folks the benefit of the doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up, again, being the oldest kid, my stepdad moving in and out of the house, I typically became the person that she would lean on, that she would talk to, who would be a confidant. And I then would look at the world through like this very like realist view. Like, no, they're just trying to take advantage of you. No, like this is what they're trying to do. Mom, like quit doing this for these people. And she would always give them the benefit of the doubt. And what I've learned now is she would always love them. That is what it was.
Yeah.
That no matter what, my mom was a representation of what love should look like in this world. She was not a perfect person. I always say like she had her ways about her, but that woman loved. Just today, we had a conversation in the unit. The commander was weighing out on whether or not he should allow someone who just reported in about 2 weeks ago to test for staff. Last year, their commander said, do not promote. We don't know what the EPR will look like with this year's closeout. And so, as everyone was going around the room giving their inputs on whether we should or should not allow this senior airman the opportunity to test, to go into the room and test for staff sergeant. As I began to talk, once it finally came around to me, because we make it a point for me and the commander to go last so we don't influence the way everyone else feels.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, as I began to talk and give my answer, all I can hear was my mom. That I, sitting at this table, was speaking nothing but life and love and light into the room and how I viewed him. It was through love first. And so she definitely had that impact on me to the point now where there are moments where I'll do it. And then like old me is disappointed in the new me. And I'm like, dang it, man. Like why would that's something my mom would say. Old me would just be done with this person. But now that is definitely one of the lenses that I view the world through.
It's crazy how it like goes full circle to how like we grow
Mm.
up and we're like defiant of our parents. Or
Yes.
one of the worst
Yeah.
things you can say to somebody like your younger years is like, you sound just like your mother, or you
Like your
sound,
mom.
and you're
No,
like,
it sounds
no,
like
no.
me.
And then you get older and it comes full circle and you're like,
Mhm.
that is her.
Yep.
That is my
Yep.
mom doing that. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And when other people say it, I'm like, oh, that's a badge of honor. When they're like, oh, that's something your mom would say. Oh, your mom used to say that all the time. And I was like, this, yeah, but it's a badge of honor.
Yeah.
Pins my heart now every time someone says that to me.
You said something a second ago. You're talking about sitting at the table. Another thing I wanted to bring up, because I think it's a good topic to talk about before we wrap this up, about
Mhm.
leadership. And talk to us about, I've read it in books before. I think Creativity Inc. mentioned something similar. But what was a little thing you used to do where you would go into like a conference room for like a meeting, and it would be, this is where I want certain people to sit. This is where I want other people to sit, in terms of leadership will sit here, youngest ranking will sit here. What was that little? I think it had like to do with sticky notes or something.
Yeah. So I would put at senior NCOA, every time a class would graduate, I would ask them to leave a note for the folks coming behind them. Because I know that it always leaves this beacon of hope that if there was somebody who sat in this seat 6 weeks ago who graduated, and on graduation day, they left me a note under this seat telling me that I could do it. Don't worry about this. Make sure you focus on this. That it would be this footprint that each student could follow to get to success themselves. And it was always this part where once they got their sticky note, and as they got closer to graduation, they would bug me. D, when do I get to leave my sticky note? I'm like, it's coming. When can I leave my message? It's coming. It's coming. And then that day when I would pass them out and ask them to tape them up under the seat, they would always ask, "Are you going to go back and read these? Is that note for me?" And when they would say, "No, it's for the next person sitting here," well, then I can't read it because that message is not for me. And they're like, "Well, that's a gamble." I'm like, "No, I trust you to guide the next person to
Mm.
where you uh, and then going into just normal meetings, even now, I make sure that I sit at the center. I know, like in the military, we got this hierarchy where it's like, hey, the dude in charge sits at the head of the table, and everything is directed that way. But what I have found is sitting at the center and making myself equal and level with everyone brings and ushers in humanity into the room first. I don't have to tell them I'm a chief master sergeant. They know that. I wear it on my chest. I don't have to tell them I'm the senior enlisted leader. If they saw my bio or my email address at the bottom, it says it. When they walk into the room, I want them to know that I see them, that I honor them, that I respect their inputs that they're going to bring. And at this table, we are equals. You may not be the person that gets to make the final decision, but as we wade through this and think through it, we are equal, and your experiences and your insight and your level of competency is just as important to the team as mine. And so I've always had this mentality of controlling, leading from the front, but controlling from the center. That if I can be somewhere in the middle, then I can control guys on the backside. I can control guys on the front side. If I need to push and pull, I can do it far better from the center versus me being 1,000 miles in front of everybody, yelling for them to keep up.
I think between you and the episode I had with Matt Doherty, I'm gonna have to like re-listen to both of these before I go like reporting back to my next squadron, because y'all both had so many little tidbits about little things like placement at a table. that can make such a big impact in a work. Like you can have more of a voice as a young airman sitting at the head of that table
Yeah.
than you would blended right in the middle and stuff. So yeah, that's good stuff. And if someone's listening to this and they're like, man, I want to know more about like what he does, because you and I both, we do a lot of stuff for people in and out of uniform in terms of personal. I'm not just gonna say professional development, because I think a lot of the training we do is both personal and professional development. Tell us about what you're doing, and then like if they want to get in contact with you, what's the best way to go about it?
Oh yeah. I started my own company, Elevating Purpose Consulting, and so you can Google Elevate Purpose, because that is what I believe in. Is that we all have something that we are supposed to give to this world, and it would be a shame to leave here and not give that thing back that we have been sent here with to gift the world. And so it has been a part of my striving to shine light into darkness. And in doing so, to be a lighthouse in helping others to elevate their purpose, to tap in to what they are supposed to give in this world. Uh, and so my gifts have made room for me. And in doing so and making room for me, it has afforded me the opportunity to go off and be flown out for the United States Air Force to different commands to host workshops and seminars, my Elevate Purpose workshops. And I have also been able to do it outside of the military in a civilian capacity as well. So if you're out there and need some life or executive coaching, you want a workshop that'll help your people elevate their purpose in your organization, please consider me.
Where can they find you at?
So if you're in the military, that's an easy one. Demetrius Booth, and you know the rest to get to me if you're in the global in the United States Air Force. If you are not, if you go to the website elevatepurposeconsulting.com, you'll know it by the lighthouse. There's a lighthouse on there. Click in there, jump in there, and you can hit the tab after you see what I'm able to offer to contact me, and it'll send a note over to my email, and I'll get back with you.
We'll have his LinkedIn on here too. We'll have all your info to where they can contact you, hit you up if they're interested. Now, definitely check them out. Like I'm telling you, even still to this day, and look, I got nothing to gain from this. You don't sign my EPR no more. But when I still tell people to this day, I'm like, in terms of capturing an audience with your words, I took so much out of the little amount of time that I have from you in terms of adding that to my game in terms of an instructor and public speaker, because I look back at 3 years I was at ALS. I'm like, man, I could have really driven things home a little bit more had I kind of how you've gone about this podcast. You really slowed down to let things sink in with people, but then you'll speed it up whenever you want to really like get them amped up. And I've said no one in this world runs the public speaking theme park of roller coaster, like taking you up and down. You're like the Walt Disney of that. And it was yeah, I've taken so much out of it, and I still teach that to this day when we talk about effective delivery skills and things of that nature. And to kind of put a bow on this episode, at the end of the day, when DJ and people that have worked for you, and 50 years from now, we'll go 50 years, when people mention your name, what do you want them to say about you?
That he shined light in darkness. That if that was the only saying on my tombstone or on the slab, if my children decide to cremate my remains, Demetrius Booth, and up under that, he shined light into darkness.
I like it. What final comments you got for listeners?
Amen. What you have is now. I know we often put things off for this future moment, this moment that does not exist yet. all of those previous moments are gone, and most times we can't do anything about it. But right now, you have an opportunity to get after it. That whatever your goal is now, that whatever your ambitions in life are now, today, this very moment, because this is all you have. If you want to make sure that you don't leave anything in the tank, that you show up wherever that final destination is based on your beliefs, empty, because you gave it all to this world, then you got to do it now. And so get after it, shine light into this world, be for someone what no one ever was for you. Be a lighthouse, shine on.
I like it. What a great way to wrap this episode up. Like I said before, we'll have all your information in the episode description on this. This has been awesome. I can't thank you enough for doing this. I know you've been here kind of since ground zero where I started the podcast. I remember talking to you in your office and I was like, yeah, I'm about to start doing this podcast here. And yeah, so I mean, you've been along for the ride since I got this going. Even hooked me up with some good guests that we've had on here. I can't thank you enough, and I appreciate you doing this.
Hey man, this was an honor to be able to jump back in again, to be a part of this episode. I believe in you, man. I believe in what you are doing. You are offering the world a peek into a place that they would not get otherwise. You are connecting the world together through your podcast, man. I dig it.
I appreciate it, and I'm definitely going to be keeping in contact with you when I go back to when I head out west here pretty soon.
Yeah.
But folks, that's all the time we got this week here on the Shadows Podcast.